Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the March Community Forum, Wimbledon Community Forum. Everybody is very welcome. Thank you very much for attending, and disappointing that once again we're on YouTube and Zoom rather than being able to meet in person. I do very much hope that will end soon. So as I say at the beginning of each meeting, this is your opportunity to hold your elected representatives to account. And in fact, this evening we have more here than normal, so that's really good. And your opportunity to contribute ideas and comments and to raise concerns. And as I think I also always say, it's your meeting, so we will go at your pace, but we do have quite a lot on this evening, which is a good thing. So please keep that in mind with your questions and comments. And the final bit is that, as usual, I'm afraid, when we're on Zoom, I am going to ask everybody to make their questions and to ask their comments by the chat. I think it's the only effective way for it working, I'm afraid. So feel free to contribute anything you want to, but please put it into the chat, and then when the speaker has finished speaking, put them into the chat at any time, but when the speaker has finished speaking, then I will ask the questions on your behalf, and they will respond. So we're very lucky this evening to have Stephen Hammond, our Member of Parliament, Leonie Cooper, the Assembly member, and some elected councillors. I think that I've captured everybody. I've seen councillors Peter Southgate, David Williams, Hayley Ormrod, Paul Kohler, and I think that's possibly it. Apologies if I have missed. Oh, and Daniel Holden, sorry, and I can see Daniel Holden too. I have many times I've said the wards that everybody's from. I'm happy to repeat that if anybody wants. Peter is joining us from Merton Park this evening, and Peter's very welcome, but he's also here to speak on a particular item. His ward is just outside the boundaries of the forum. So everybody's very welcome. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll hand straight over to you.
James, thank you, and it's a particular pleasure to be here this evening. Particularly as last night I was due to be speaking at the Rains Park version of the forum and found myself voting until about 8:30, and so didn't make the forum. And yet today, although the House of Commons was still sitting until about 7 o'clock, there weren't any votes today, so I was able to make sure I'm here this evening. So it's a particular pleasure to be here, and it's a little while, I think, since I've joined you on one of the forums. I really wanted to talk about four things very quickly. Clearly, the most important thing happening in politics nationally, internationally, and locally is Ukraine and the aggressive and barbaric invasion of the Ukraine by the Russian state. I think what is true to say is that the government's response to this internationally, along with international partners, has been relatively quick and relatively effective. Many of you will have noticed today that there is some concern that although the Ukrainians appear to be taking back some of the cities that they've lost, there is some concern about whether or not some of the aid promised by certain countries is actually reaching it fast enough to help them in terms of the military aid. I think the concern, clearly, there are a number of concerns, but given where we are at the moment, which is effectively 4 weeks into this invasion and the war, the concern, I think, is for a lot of it must be that we could be in for a prolonged period of attrition and siege for the Ukrainian people. And I think we have to think very carefully about how the international community is going to respond in terms of ensuring food lines, air bridges in, and other such things. And it's a very difficult situation. I think where it touches locally, it is fair to say, and it is my view, that although I think a number of the refugee schemes are now up and running, they took longer than they should have done to get up and running. And I was one of a group of my colleagues who wrote to the Prime Minister about this. I'm delighted that the Homes for Ukraine's scheme is open. I accept, and I spoke to the refugee minister about it yesterday, about making the forms that some people have to fill in easier than they have been. They are easier than they were last week, but they should be easier to fill in, and even more so. And I'm told that we're going to produce a simplified form which should be up and running. My colleague, my former colleague, but now colleague in the Lords, Richard Harrington, is the minister, and he has had particular experience because he helped to organise the UK refugee response, coordinating various departments on Syria, and he's doing the same now. Locally, I have started a list of a number of people who've written to me wanting to volunteer, and I know the local council is doing the same. And I would urge people who feel that they can sponsor a Ukrainian to offer that. The good news is that when it says sponsor, you don't actually have to know them personally, because we are following the well-trodden Canadian path, which is generally believed to be the world leader in this, and actually working with a number of the major NGOs, connecting people with people who can offer accommodation to the people who need it. So I think, James, it would be wrong not to start with that, and there may be some questions on that at the end. I wanted to really then just talk about three more local things. One is two very big local planning applications that have attracted a huge amount of concern. One right in the centre of Wimbledon, the St George's East building, where a number of people are very concerned that the planning committee passed that application. It is considerably larger in terms of height than was expected, and would not have, had we got the local plan in place, would not have passed. And one is bound to say that if you look at the design of that building, it really represents nothing more than a very sort of standard glass-fronted building application. And I know a number of people have raised considerable concerns with me about it, and I have written to the mayor suggesting that this is certainly an appropriate planning application where his plans, his ability to call in applications should be used. I understand that there's also several local petitions running about this, and I think there's further comment likely to happen. It does play into the point that we still don't have locally, although a lot of work was done on this, certainly in the period 2017, 2018, 2019 on the local plan. And I remember hosting a number of Saturday lunchtime, I suppose, round tables with local residents groups talking about the local plan and feeding into it. And so the plan that is there, I think, has some merits to it, particularly in terms of it defines areas for commercial expansion, areas for residential expansion. It lays out in some detail sort of height and bulk of likely building. And I think that had that been in place, this application at St George's East wouldn't have happened. The other application, which is clearly attracting both local, national and international comment, is the All England's application for plans on the Wimbledon Park golf course, as it's known. It's fair to say, I think, that this application is controversial in a number of ways, and controversial not only in Wimbledon and the borough of Merton, but also controversial in Wandsworth as well. And I think there are 4 or 5 major concerns that local residents are talking to me about. And I have worked with local residents groups to meet the All England to try and find some solutions. That doesn't, and I've held a public meeting as well on the subject. I think the major concerns are, one, the prolonged closure of Church Road during the summer. To say that's of greater concern at the Southfields end rather than the Wimbledon end. But in the Wimbledon end, particularly residents in Wimbledon Park, Wimbledon Village and Hillside, there are concerns being raised about 5 things really. One is the planning application obviously is on metropolitan open land, and again, normally metropolitan open land status protects development. 2, the number of courts that the All England are proposing, which is considerably more than there are at Roehampton. So the question mark is, if you do really need the number of courts they're suggesting to run a qualifying tournament. 3, the scale and size of the new show court. for the fact that there is a public park, and that a public park to be created, and it is undeniable that that is a benefit, and I think that is to be welcomed. There are some issues about, broadly speaking, the permissiveness of the park and who is actually going to run it into the long term and who will have control over it, and the guarantees that it will remain an open public park, and the siting of, fifthly, the siting of a number of maintenance buildings in the public park. And if they were sited elsewhere on the scheme, I think it would make the park generally more open and more public. This is a controversial application. I believe it's likely to be heard in Wandsworth fairly quickly after the local government elections, and in Merton probably either at the June or the July planning committee meeting. So I think there is still amount of time before we know the resolution of this application. It is also there is also a covenant which Merton Council is effectively the trustee of for the local population, which, depending on who you speak to and which lawyer you speak to, effectively prevents building on the golf course land. We will wait and see exactly what happens there, because there clearly will be differences of interpretation, but it is pretty clear that the covenant is there to protect the land, to make sure that it is an open vista, that building shouldn't happen. I guess there are three outcomes. One is that the local council, I know, are taking legal advice, but the issue here is that it is pretty clear that if the local council take the legal advice, and that legal advice is that there is no building on the land, that will not prevent the planning application, because the planning application is a separate process, but will effectively stop it happening. Then there is, I guess, the chance for it to be taken to the land tribunal, and there is also the point that it could be waived by the local council, or some accommodation could be met. But nonetheless, I think the All England application is one that is probably the planning application that's attracting most controversy locally at the moment. I just wanted to comment on two other major things, James. One is people will be aware that the National Parliamentary Boundaries Committee is in sitting and in process, and 2 Mondays ago I made a submission to the Parliamentary Boundary Commission on behalf of Wimbledon, because I believe that it is quite clear that Wimbledon itself is a cohesive constituency. It's one that's been kept together through several iterations of the Boundary Commission's proposals, and I think keeping what were effectively the 10 wards is going to change slightly in the new local government iteration, but keeping the 10 wards together as they are, it should be the building block. And the proposal to take a couple of the wards out and put a couple and then add extra in, I don't think makes a great deal of sense. And I made that point at the boundaries review. But people will want to look at that. The next process of that is that we will see the Assistant Commissioner's recommendations later this year, and it will be finalised by the middle of next year. And James, I think probably I've been speaking for rather longer than I said I would, so I'll leave it at that. And if there are any questions.
Stephen, thank you very much for that. So, so can I have? I've had councillor comments, but I'm going to pause and just allow resident comments. Since Stephen started speaking, we've been joined by 2 more councillors, Simon McGrath and Nigel Benbow are here too. And
there's one in the waiting room.
So comments and questions, please, into the group chat by residents first. Okay. So 2 comments so far by councillors, Stephen. The first, I mean, I do say this most meetings. It's unfortunate I keep having to say it. It is a meeting for residents, not a meeting for politicians. Okay, so I'm going to take residents' questions first. I assume call it in. Has Stephen asked the mayor to count it in, perhaps call it in, or the Secretary of State for Housing? And this is the application in the town centre, Stephen. So is that something that you have been able to take some action on or plan?
Yeah, I mean, as I said in my statement, I have written to the mayor. That will be the normal first process. And on the All England, I've written to both the mayor and the Secretary of State about it, because there is some concern that on the All England, the mayor may be conflicted by statements he's made, but I'm not sure whether that's true or not. But nonetheless, on the All England application, I've written to both the mayor and the Secretary of State. The response from the Secretary of State was that he is aware of both applications. He's contacted both local councils. He will see the planning committee through and will then, at that stage, make a decision about whether to call it in.
Okay.
But I've written to. I haven't, and in response to Sarah's last comment, I've had nothing back from the mayor's office yet about the St George's East call-in letter. But I will put something up on my website as and when I get something back.
Okay, thank you both. Any other resident comments or questions? So this is your opportunity to hold your MP to account, but also to contribute any ideas or comments that you want to at this stage. Okay, I will take the 2 political points, but I do keep saying that's not what this process is about. This is what the council chamber's for. What we're here to do tonight is to listen to residents' views. So Stephen, you've been asked 2 questions.
Yeah.
Simon McGrath has asked, he said he's a bit puzzled on your comment about the local plan because the Conservative group voted against it. I mean, you can see merit in the local plan as we can, but the Conservative group obviously decided to vote against it. You may not have a comment to make on that. I'd have thought.
Well, I mean, the point is that I guess that there were elements of the local plan you as a Conservative group didn't like, and I support some of that. What my point is that we almost any number of other boroughs have a local plan in place, and if this one had been rejected and then come back with a modification, it could have gone. The problem is that because there is not a local plan, some of the restrictions on the planning committee which would be there aren't there at the moment, and that was the point I was seeking to make rather than making any particular political point. It's the fact that we have taken so long to get a local plan in place is a hindrance when local residents are seeking to make a strong point about some of the applications. And in terms of Paul's comment, I'm not suggesting that I've heard anything that that the covenant is not effective and or enforceable. What I was suggesting was merely that, and Paul as a lawyer would know that if you put 2 lawyers in a room, you can quite often get 2 different opinions. And what I am suggesting is that, you know, the council are taking legal advice. I know residents groups are taking legal advice, and certainly the residents group legal advice is exactly as Paul would suggest, that the covenant is effective and enforceable. But and that he believes there is no prospect of the Lands Tribunal waiving the covenant, and that's certainly a legal advice I've seen. I haven't been privy to the council's legal advice, nor have I been privy to the advice of the All England. I am merely reflecting that one needs to understand quite often that you don't always get a unanimity of opinion in civil legal advice cases.
Okay, I want to call a halt to that exchange, but what I will do, because my job is to be neutral, I will read out the rest of Paul's comment. As a property lawyer, I can assure him there is no prospect of the Land Tribunal waiving the covenant under their Section 84 powers, which was Paul's comment. Any other residents' comments or questions for Stephen? Because we will release him to his other duties if not. So this is your last chance. Chris, anything on YouTube?
No, James, not at the moment.
Okay. Um, Simon, I'm sorry. I know that we're near an election, but I mean, I keep saying it's a residents' meeting. Stephen, thank you. Unless you've got anything else you want to talk about,
Oh,
thank
yeah,
you so
I
much
guess,
for joining us.
No, that's very kind of you, James, and thank you. I make the usual thing that I say, that I am contactable through my email, hammonds@parliament.uk, and people should feel free to use that to raise issues or comments with me.
Stephen, thank you. Of course, you're welcome to stay, but appreciate you're very busy. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
James, thank you, and thank you to everybody.
Leonie Cooper now joins us, the Assembly member for Wandsworth and for Merton. Leonie, thank you very much for coming to see us. You're very welcome, and over to you.
Thanks very much, James. And in fact, it's Merton and Wandsworth.
What did I say? What did I say?
You said Wandsworth and Merton, which is quite.
Okay.
And I'm quite shocked because I find myself here in Merton, and you're trying to put Wandsworth in front. It's normally people in Wandsworth who try that, but it is actually Merton and Wandsworth. So I'm going to sort of touch on some of the same things that Stephen has touched on, but probably from a slightly different perspective, because obviously there is a bit of crossover around some of the planning issues, for example, because as has already been mentioned, it is something that will come to City Hall. But obviously, firstly, there is a London-wide perspective both on the pandemic. We've obviously moved from Omicron to this new Omicron Delta crossover, or BA2 or whatever it is. So although some of the restrictions have changed, we do still have the London Resilience Forum, and some of the London-wide pan-London bodies are still meeting and keeping very much a watching brief to be aware of what's going on across the boroughs in terms of London's health and in terms of pressure on hospitals. But obviously the pandemic, I think, is now very much taking a second place to the events in Ukraine and the appalling activities of Vladimir Putin. And it's something that we've debated in the Assembly plenary, and we proposed an urgent motion to the plenary, not last week, but the week before, calling for support and help for refugees seeking to enter the UK. And I think Stephen has already touched on the fact that it's still a pretty complicated process, and we're looking for government to make it easier for people who are leaving Ukraine, and 10 million displaced people. It's just happens so astonishingly fast as well, and it's an amazing thing that so many people have stepped up and have said that they're interested in housing people in their own houses. I think it's fantastic, and it shows just how much mutual aid people really want to offer. I think it builds actually on some of what people did during the pandemic. We've obviously just had the spring statement, and the cost of living crisis is also continuing to make news, and I'll come back to that subsequently. One of the things that we have just approved as the Assembly is the Mayor's budget, and the Mayor has an element of council tax. It goes to the Mayor of London. It's actually smaller in all the boroughs than the amount that goes to the local council. So you may have seen some coverage of the percentage increase. It actually works out as an increase of about 60 pence per week on a Band D council tax property. And the key priorities for the coming year are: the Mayor wants to put £90 million into a climate emergency fund, and the idea behind that is to unlock investment from the private and the public sector into decarbonisation schemes, because obviously that's still a huge project of trying to reach net zero. He also wants to put 23 million into schemes to tackle youth violence and violence against women and girls, which has also been massively a huge issue that needs to be addressed, and so more money going towards the violence reduction unit and also to deal with the situation with women and girls. 14 million to provide opportunities for young people. This includes 10 millions going towards the successor for the Young Londoners Fund, and 4 million to ensure that Sport Unite is able to continue. 5 million is going to be going out to the boroughs to assist them with their right to buy back. So buying back properties that were sold under the right to buy, to make them available for some of the many people who are on waiting lists across London. And 3.7 million to go to the advice sector, 3 million to help many bodies to leverage in funding from other partners. Quite often, if you give a certain amount, then match funding can come in. And 700,000 is going to ensure that the Warmer Homes Advice Fund is kept running, which is obviously quite vital given the current situation with the energy price cap lifting and what's happening in terms of energy bills going up. Just to say just one or two things about Transport for London. Obviously, one of the aspects of Transport for London at the moment has been that we've had a series of very, very short-term agreements with the government. There have been, the government has been supporting through the Department for Transport operators across the country. Because of the pandemic, so many people stopped going to work and started working from home, and the number of people using TfL is still only back up to about 60% of what it was before the pandemic started, and from almost actually it is exactly today, the 23rd of March 2020, 2 years ago today, was when the first lockdown was announced. So it's really changed all of our lives over the last 2 years. And one of the issues why it's so difficult having these short-term arrangements is it's impossible for Transport for London then to go off and raise its own money. And of course, 55 pence out of every pound that London Underground spends, for example, is spent outside of London. The black cabs are made just outside Coventry. The red buses are made in Northern Ireland. There are 43,000 jobs across the country that are dependent on contracts that TfL has, and the new Piccadilly line trains that are made in Goole in Yorkshire. So it's really important. London is the economic engine that drives the country. We are net tax contributors in as a region, which is not true of many other regions. And so, when we say, well, we need help in terms of, supporting TfL, that's just the same as supporting Transport in Manchester or any of the private train operators. And it's not a sort of, we want a net amount out, because we're actually essentially, we are net contributors at the moment. So it's really important that we get a long-term deal. And I know that the new Deputy Mayor for Transport, Seb Dance, is going to be he's working with Grant Shapps and the officials at TfL and the Department for Transport, because we do need to sort this out. As I mentioned, we had a plenary this month, and we had motions on the cost of living crisis, the London living wage, fuel poverty, the national insurance increase, many different areas. We unanimously agreed the one on Ukraine and refugees. We weren't quite as unanimous on some of those other areas that I've just mentioned. We also had a plenary session where we just focused on London's economic recovery, and we had the Deputy Mayor for Business there and cross-questioned him, and the Night Tsar, Amy LeMay. Obviously creative, cultural and hospitality has all been hit quite hard, and actually central London has been hit worse and is recovering more slowly almost than anywhere else in the country. So that has been quite a concern. So we've really been focusing on that. And finally, talking as sort of London-wide, I do need to say something about the situation that's happened with the Metropolitan Police Service and the Commissioner leaving. This whole of this last year, 2021, this time last year, we just heard about Sarah Everard. There'd been the pretty heavy-handed policing of the vigil on Clapham Common. Sarah Everard left a house in Wandsworth to walk back to where her house was in Lambeth. So, lots and lots and lots of constituents who went to that vigil. Clapham Common is right next to Wandsworth. And then what's emerged through the port inquest, and really that the police took a terrible attitude towards young men who were being murdered. WhatsApp groups where horrible language has been used. It's almost unbelievable to think that the police have been so. There have been many accusations of them also being very heavy-handed towards Black people, appalling treatment of women. And now also, nothing less, it was homophobic. And so, the mayor had called the commissioner in and was being quite sort of strong and saying, look, all of this, I have got to have a plan, and it does all need to be sorted out. I think it's unfortunate that she decided to resign in the way that she did, in one way, because she does have huge support amongst the police force. And I think it was Frank Dobson, when he first became Secretary of State for Health eons ago now, who said trying to turn around something like the National Health Service and sort it out is like trying to turn around a supertanker, and trying to turn around the Metropolitan Police Service is like trying to turn around a supertanker. But, progress has obviously been slow. I don't think we're quite where we used to be in the 1970s. But, again, this week, we've just, the stuff that's just come out about Daniel Morgan. And, he came to talk to an assembly meeting just about 6 months ago. Corruption. Every time you think the police have moved on, and then something else has emerged. So I perhaps it is right that also that she's gone. We do need to rebuild trust with so many different people across London. I think it's been, unbelievably difficult. And I have also received a lot of complaints from people who were really angry that they felt that the police were not going to investigate what's become known as Partygate. And then eventually they did say that they would, and indeed that continues to go on, because I think a lot of people felt really cross that they put these restrictions onto everyone else, and then felt that it should apply to everybody. So we've been we see the police, we see the senior police, we see we bring them before our committees, and we do cross question them very, very closely, and on that note about local people and having the opportunity to have those discussions at City Hall, like Stephen, I've received a lot of representations, both about the All England Lawn Tennis Club's proposals for the 8,000-seater stadium and their various other installations that they want to put in Wimbledon Park, and additionally about the St George's East block in the centre of town. And I have had some meetings with some of the planning officers, and next week I will be having a private meeting with the Deputy Mayor for Planning, so that I can express the view absolutely directly, not just in writing but in person, to him, to make the points that people have been making so clearly to me about their views about both of these planning applications. We don't, as Assembly members, have a direct role to play in terms of having a vote on these things, but I do think we have a very strong role to play in making sure that local views are communicated to City Hall. I'll leave it there, Chair. Oh, sorry, I've just caught you just as you were just blowing your nose there. Sorry, that was just the wrong moment to finish there. I'll leave it there. I don't know whether anyone's got any questions that they want to put. I can see one from Michael Bull, which I haven't managed to read yet. So
Leonie, thank you very much for that, and thank you for your report. The only question so far is about is congestion charges and whether they should be stopped at the weekends. I don't know if you have a comment or view on that.
So the okay, so there's three different points in there. So the bottom one, the 8.8% rise in the mayor's share of the mayor's precept, as I said, it works out as, because it's a much smaller precept in the first place, it works out as being about 60 pence a week. And look, the amount of support that comes to City Hall from central government grant, government actually agrees that they're underfunding, for example, the money that they should be giving City Hall for the police. That there's an assessment been made, for example, by the Home Office for the amount of money that London should get for the national and international cities grant, and it's 200 million short. So, short of saying, well, you're not giving us the extra that we should be getting because we've got some, key terrorist targets, for example, Parliament. We've just had the anniversary of, the 2017 attack on Parliament. So, we have to pay for that protection out of the Metropolitan Police. Buckingham Palace, we can't not provide protection, but we are not, we're not, we're not, we're not given the extra money. So the mayor has had to raise the precept. And the other points in terms of, no, the mayor's not waging war on cars. I think, if you look at the mayor's transport plan, it is very clear that by 2041, that 80% of journeys should be done either by active travel, so that would be on foot, by bicycle, e-bike, that sort of thing, or by public transport. That leaves 20% of journeys, and for some people that might be 100% of their journeys, because they might have particular disabilities. But we do also need, we would not allow water to be drunk by Londoners if it was poisoning us. And the problem is, because we can't see the particles because they're so small in the air, and we can't see the gases because they're invisible, air in London does need to be cleaned up. So the idea that we can do that is something that Sadiq, the consultation will start over the expansion of the ULEZ. I don't think that is a total war on cars, but it does mean that we either need to change to cleaner vehicles, or for some journeys to consider other forms of transport and how we travel. But we do need to wean ourselves off this our reliance on cars that pump out quite a lot of CO2, NOx, and also particulates. It just really isn't good for us. And in terms of taking the congestion charge off at the weekends again, that has all become part of the discussion with the Department of Transport. And so that will, all of the changes that can or might be made will be something that has to be agreed with the Department for Transport, just as enlarging the ultra low emission zone is also something that ultimately does also need central government sign off as well.
Okay, Leonie, thank you very much for that. I can see that there have been some comments from a couple of former members of the council, which I will come to, but taking residents' comments first. Leonie, good question. Holding our elected representatives to account. You on this one, I'm afraid. So Sarah has asked the question, where she is saying that she welcomes the investment by the mayor into a climate emergency fund. But what are your views on the fact that the £2 billion, Sarah says, is earmarked for the Silvertown, intended for the Silvertown tunnel? Her point is that could go a very long way to tackling poor air quality in the capital, and makes the point that 4 councils, Greenwich being the latest, have rejected those plans. Could you maybe give us a little bit of comment and your views on that thought?
Sure. Well, there won't be £2 billion invested by the mayor into the Silvertown tunnel. It's an arrangement with a company that is going to be digging the tunnel and they will raise the money, and they will then get their money back through the tolls. So there isn't a very large sum of money that is going into Silvertown. That is something that a lot of people seem to think that there is, and that it could go somewhere else. There isn't. And also some people have said, oh, well, the tolls will never happen. They will, because that is how the money that gets raised is going to be repaid. So it's essentially that is a misunderstanding. In terms of why the Silvertown tunnel has been agreed, it's because at the other end of the river, we have a certain number of bridges between southwest London and northwest London, or even just West London. But once you get past Tower Bridge, the connectivity at that end of the river, and obviously it gets wider as well, it is, I think there are only three means of getting across. You've got the Rotherhithe Tunnel, and then you've got the Dartford Bridge and the Dartford Tunnel. And the idea is that this would create connectivity to improve what is an incredibly congested part of southeast London, and it will improve air quality. The modelling has been done by TfL showing that it would improve air quality. And the idea is with the tolling is that a lot of the usage of the tunnel will be buses, which currently are very stuck in traffic. And it will enable electric buses to go backwards and forwards. And the tolling, I think, will be linked to the CO2 output of the vehicles that want to use the tunnel, although I'd need to actually look into that last point again to be absolutely certain that is how the tolling is. I'm not sure how detailed the information is about how the tolling is going to be worked out, but I think that's how. I don't, and on that basis, TfL's modelling does not show that it will increase traffic. There will always be very heavy traffic in that part of southeast London, because you've got the A2 and the A20 going out, and they go down to the docks. I used to work on Blackheath Hill, and I can absolutely tell you that there is a huge amount of traffic that is lorries going up and down Blackheath Hill all the time, continuously, without ceasing, going out through Greenwich, because it's going down to the docks, it's going down to Dover and Folkestone, and Londoners need to eat, amongst other things. So, there has been strengthening of the road network going down to Southampton, and that was extremely controversial when the M3 went through Twyford Down. And then also strengthening of the road that goes out through Hackney and then out through Waltham Forest, and that was where Swampy became famous. And again, that is going out to Felixstowe and the docks up there. And actually, if you look at what's happened with the congestion on the M3, it has broadly gone, despite the fact there's still a lot of lorries that use that road. And also similarly on the M11 Link Road, the huge traffic jams up there. I have no proof either way as yet as to whether this will be the case in southeast London, but if that is my understanding of the way that the tunnel has been and the modelling has been done.
So Leonie, thank you. You may have answered Sarah's follow-up because you have talked about other examples where you're saying the work has been successful. But Sarah further asked if 4 councils are disagreeing with the mayor on increased traffic, HGVs and air pollution. What steps is the mayor taking to address those concerns or show that he's listening to those councils?
I believe he has gone through the figures several times with all of those councils, but there has been a strong push from a number of campaign groups against it. And in the end of it, the mayor is not just looking at what's right for one local council, or even 2, or even 3, or even 4. He's the mayor of the whole of London, so he has to look at it on a London-wide basis. And I think this is a very difficult decision, but it's one that he made not long after I was first elected in 2016. So we're quite a long way down the route now of this going ahead. And I think, councils to not agree with it now, I think they should have been making those points quite a lot further back in the process. Where we've just been talking about the All England Club and St George's, is that we're absolutely on the money. We're discussing something that is a live application, but this is actually something that was decided almost 6 years ago now. So I don't think that he's not listening to those councils, but I think they are a bit late to be making objections at this point.
Okay, thank you. And then there are two more to get to. There may be others, but two more that I can see at the moment. Daniel Holden has asked the question about your meeting with the deputy mayor, which I think you said you are having as opposed to have had. Is that right?
I am.
Right. So the question is, do you know when the deputy mayor might make a decision following your upcoming meeting?
Not yet, but once I've had my update meeting, if I find something out, I'll drop Daniel a line, daniel.holden@merton.gov.uk. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then a detailed question from Peter Walker, Leone. Peter has pointed out that a pollution alert has been announced today by the mayor. He further points out that in 2018, in April 2021, a coroner called for the change in the law after he judged that air pollution led to the death of a 9-year-old. Peter then goes on to remind you that he wrote to you in 2018 about the Harris School in South Wimbledon, and at the time he pointed out to you the pollution, what he believes to be the pollution dangers there, and he has reminded you that that the area is one of the 50 most polluted sites in London, was what a report had said. He goes on to talk about Merton Council's view that air pollution is amongst the highest in the borough. I'm just for the benefit of residents, I'm sure Peter's comments are accurate, but I'm reporting what he has written rather than knowing what other people may have written. And so Leone, Peter then goes on to ask whether you wish that at the time you had supported those who are objecting to the school being based where it is.
So I think in brief, no, I do not regret it. My role as the London Assembly member is to hold the mayor to account and to raise issues, be the voice particularly for people from Merton and Wandsworth in City Hall. And one of the really important things that I've been doing, which I think it was Michael Bull who posted, so he might strongly object to what I'm about to say, but is I have pushed the mayor quite hard over issues relating to air quality. In fact, before either of us arrived at City Hall, and he included some pledges in his manifesto for 2016 and his manifesto for 2021. Which have seen a gradual approach, which I have to say I also think is really sensible. If you go from 0 to 100 in terms of, you've got no measures to help people move and change their lives and stop being reliant on fossil fuel burning vehicles. And if you asked everyone overnight to suddenly, I think it was Michael who said a war on cars, I don't think that works. And the mayor immediately began consulting people from May 2016 onwards to say, I am going to launch the ULEZ, and then I'm going to expand the ULEZ. I'm going to precede the ULEZ with the T charge. And he has now, and I was sitting there with Rosamond Adukisi-Deborah's mother in the front row and watched him talk about enlarging the ULEZ to make it cover the whole of Greater London. And I think that has been the right approach. Particularly if you look at when the first Central London ULEZ scheme was launched, compliance was only at 37% in the first couple of months. The new enlarged one that's come out to the North and South Circular, compliance is round about 90% in the first month already. Now, people don't drive dirty cars along Merton Way and then change their car when they get to the North and South Circular. But of course, it's now really important that having established that level of compliance out to the North and South Circular, which probably means that people are beginning to change their cars and the pollution is dropping everywhere, but actually to now really start to bring that all the way out and to encompass Merton Way and the whole of Merton, indeed the whole of London, enlarging the ULEZ scheme to being the Greater London ULEZ is absolutely the right thing to do. And so it may have not gone as quickly as previous Councillor Walker would have liked. It may have gone too quickly for Michael Bull, who, just through the set of remarks above, is talking about the war, that the mayor is making war on cars. And that's the issue, isn't it? We're asking people to change, but at the same time, other people are saying you're not going fast enough. And, these are difficult decisions, I think. But I do think on this particular occasion, the mayor has done the right thing. He has moved ahead. He has implemented, and I should say he implemented the ULEZ, which was originally announced by the previous mayor, who I think we all know has now got another job doing something else. So, I think there has been some unity around this. How we've proceeded, I'm sure that, there will continue to be debate. And some people will say we've gone too quickly and it's a war on cars. And some people will say you haven't gone fast enough and you've left children with their lungs exposed. I am going to continue to fight for air quality to be improved across the whole of London. And I will therefore, but I will also want to consult with people. So, for example, things like, scrappage, how should that work? How can that work? What will make that work best for local people in Merton? Because it will be a change for people, but it's so important for the reasons that previous Councillor Walker has outlined in his very long contribution just that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leonie. I don't know whether this is another. I'm feeling this might be Peter again, but I can't even move my cursor up, I'm afraid, Peter, if it is you. Oh, no, it's not. I apologise, Peter, I apologise. Just before we move on, I will say, Leonie, as you know, that Peter's been very passionate about this issue for a number of years. And I personally shared and share his view that that school is not in an ideal location. So the reason I was happy to pass on his comments in such detail is obviously he's left the council a number of years ago now, but he has felt very passionately about this particular subject for some time. Sarah is carrying on the same issue. Leonie, can I just invite you to read that yourself as it's just popped up, traffic around the Harris School.
Sure, I can see Peter's remark about, actually the bottom line is for all of us, it's not just about individual locations. The World Health Organization, the WHO, has just changed its guidance and advice on what constitutes a safe level of pollution. And they've actually advised that they don't think there is a safe level of pollution at all, at any level, whether it's a hotspot or whether it's just the background. So whether it's very close to a particular road or whether it's not. Whether or not I was the chair of the Environment Committee is completely irrelevant to the agreement of the council to decide that they wanted to put a school there. We don't have a veto on the Environment Committee of this kind of thing at all. And, I am pleased that from next year that we are going to enlarge the ultra low emission zone and the air pollution will go down. There is no doubt about it. And also in terms of the climate emergency, it will address that as well, because there will be less CO2. I can see that Sarah has also said that the WHO has said that. Now, I'm not sure that they have always said that there was no safe level for pollution. They did actually have a limit. There was a limit value, and actually Putney High Street, which is another reason why I've been campaigning on this for a long time. But of course, it benefits many parts of Merton as well, because a number of the buses along Putney High Street also travelled through Merton. Was one of the locations where it competed with Oxford Street and Brixton Road to break the limit values first thing, for the 1st, 2nd or 3rd of January. So it's something that's a really important issue in terms of cleaning up London's air, and we need to now move on. We're going to be pressing the mayor around moving from low emission bus zones to zero emission bus zones. So those bits of the the fleet that the mayor has control of, I will certainly be pushing very hard for for those diesel buses, for example, to be phased out in favour of electric and hydrogen. That's just one for it.
Okay. Thanks, Leonie. I'm conscious that, to be fair to you, you're here obviously this evening as Assembly member, and I think it's right to ask you to comment on the school because you supported it, but I can now see comments are getting really quite detailed, and they would be more issues. I think you're welcome to comment if you would like to, but there are more issues for the council. It's we don't have a member of the administration here this evening, as far as I know, or a member of the Labour group. So you've been left. Oh,
James, I was just going to say I didn't support the school particularly, but I didn't campaign against it. I picked up the issues that I felt were appropriate as the Assembly member to raise at City Hall, and certainly the issue that's raised there about the safety measures around the school, that is definitely not an Assembly member type issue. And I'm not saying that because I don't support safety measures, but it's just not something that we are responsible for. And I think it's quite important to make that distinction that we fulfill certain functions, but certain things are kind of not within our purview, if you like.
No, and I think I hope that regular attenders this evening will agree that in the 8 years that I've done this, I have been very neutral and attempted always to be very neutral and to give both sides. It is disappointing that this evening that there is nobody from the administration here. Usually there is a Labour member here, but this evening there isn't. So unfortunately, that is an important question about safety and the injury of two pupils, but there isn't anybody to answer that. And Leonie, as you quite rightly say, and in fact I'd said it first, it's not your responsibility. Do we have any other questions or comments for Leonie before she leaves us? So Leonie, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you for your time, Leonie, and we look forward to welcoming you to future forums. But thank you for your report this evening. And Leonie has put her email into the group chat for anybody who would like to make representations to her directly. So that's Leonie Cooper, the Assembly member. Thanks, Leonie, and have a good, as I said to Stephen, you're very welcome to stay, but we appreciate you're also very busy.
Thanks very much, James, and good to see everybody. And I think it's been slightly more effective than my last attempt to log on to the Wimbledon Community Forum Zoom meeting. Do email me if there's something else that you suddenly think of that we've not covered. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you, Leonie. So next we have Councillor Peter Southgate. Peter is, I don't think, a regular attender at this forum because, as I said at the beginning, his ward is outside the area of this forum. Peter is the leader of the on the council of the Independent Residents Group, and he's a councillor for Merton Park, as I've said already. And I'm assuming, Peter, you have chaired the High Streets Task Group. So, Peter, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Yes, well, thank you, Chair. Indeed, you are right. I don't often attend this particular forum, but I'm very pleased to have been invited to do so, to talk about our recently concluded study on the High Street. Just a little caveat, if I may. This went to Cabinet just on Monday. And whilst the Cabinet member, Councillor Pritchard, was quite gushing, no, not gushing, but receptive in his comments, Cabinet are not bound to accept our recommendations. And what in fact will happen, what they've agreed to do, is to set up an officer working party to work out how to implement the findings and take them forward. So in fact, that's quite reassuring, because both Councillor Pritchard and I are not standing for re-election. So it's good to know that there is a mechanism in place to take this forward. And in fact, it's got off the ground quite a long time ago, in June 2020. And since then, other things have come along. We've had the Your Merton consultation, now developed into the Merton Vision through to 2030. We've had various initiatives from Future Merton in improving shopping parades in different parts of the borough, but they're all in a way going in the same direction. They are about the way in which we have rediscovered the importance of our high streets, and they were suffering even before the pandemic came along. But I think the pandemic, with the growth in online shopping, I think the pandemic has maybe it's kept us at home a bit more, walk about and appreciate our high streets a little more, realise they are important, realise too what's lacking, and that's really set off a train of thought about how do we want them to look as they come back. There does seem to be a consensus that we want them to serve different functions, less about retailing, less, I think in a way we can be grateful we're not a Croydon or a Kingston and dependent on massive shopping centres, because the future is going to be less retailing, more socialising. I think we would like to develop the role of our high streets as community hubs. And as I say, the task group focused on this. Councillor Kohler was one of the more energetic members of our small task group, and I'd like to thank him for his input to our final recommendations. So the findings generally that would apply across all of the 5 high streets we looked at, we are concerned, or we realise that the green agenda matters more to us, and we spent some time working out how we could move from the high street to the countryside, and how near was it, trying to work out where the green links were, even if it's down to little bits of greenery like parklets and planting around road junctions. We acknowledged and indeed recognised the importance of arts and culture events, and that's particularly true of Wimbledon, in just bringing people together and making them feel better about their high street and where they live. We certainly feel there is a role for town centre managers. We've had them in the past, and we feel we need them again to link the council up with the independent businesses in their high street, and to support them. It's not just about telling them off for sticking an A board out. We'd like to involve them in collective events that will draw people to the high street and make them want to stay there. There is a role too for a digital offer, a platform, if you like, or an online presence that independent businesses can latch into, that can be used both to publish their activities and also to promote events that are going to take place in the high street. And I'm pleased that Future Merton are already working on that. The other point is that we don't know yet how everything will come back from the pandemic, but one thing we feel is that people will be less anxious to go back to that 5-day-a-week grind of commuting. Many people, some will see the great retirement, won't we? Some will decide not to go back at all, but others may well look to build up businesses more locally. We do see a space there then, literally a space for workplaces that could be provided locally on a short-term and fairly informal basis. Finally, sorry, excuse me a moment. All of this might sound like the sort of recommendations you could make for any high street, but every single one of them has a history, and it is in that, I think, that the USP lies, the things that people value about their high streets are the old buildings, are the tradition, are the history. And we see scope there to weave that history into a town trail that can take people from one historic landmark to another, take them on hopefully to a walk into the nearest park or open space. And in that way, it's that sense of place, of belonging through time, I think, that is what people value and what leads them to want to cherish their high street. So that's important. If I'd look specifically at Wimbledon, which is it's our only major town centre, isn't it? Probably the most successful. It is a brand in its own right. And of course, it has, to an extent, the apparatus of a successful town centre. It has a BID, a business improvement district, which can operate some of the things that we perhaps would look for town centre managers to pull together in our smaller high streets, such as the markets on the piazza and seasonal events. I think the other interesting aspects for Wimbledon are the loss of Debenhams from Centre Court. Call it loss, call it opportunity. We are very encouraged by what we've seen thus far of the plans of Romulus, the new owners, to open Centre Court out onto the Queen's Road frontage in particular, and also to provide small informal workspaces, community spaces, not to look for a replacement anchor tenant. So that's very much the way that we see the high street changing, and they seem to be in sympathy with that. Another aspect in Wimbledon, which is not yet visible elsewhere in the borough, is the Wimbletech, rather, in the library. We were really quite excited about what's going on there and their role as an incubator for local startups and entrepreneurs. And there's seemingly a lot of bright minds there, and we think they could be harnessed to come up with ideas for Wimbledon that it would be well worth pursuing. The other, and mentioning too, of course, that Wimbledon has probably the most developed arts and cultural scene of anywhere in the borough. And there is a nascent and identifiable cultural quarter, if you like, running down from the new Wimbledon Theatre. And that seems to provide a nucleus around which bars and such like can offer more low-scale, informal entertainment events, stand-up comedy, jazz nights that will bring people in, will encourage perhaps amateur talent to get involved too. If there is a shortcoming, it is the lack of green space near the town centre, isn't it? you have South Park Gardens, and there would be scope, I think, to just make people, visitors to the town, more aware of where South Park Gardens are, actually. And that could be a part of this idea I put forward of a trail of historic sites and centres that could build in somewhere like South Park Gardens, which to my mind is one of the most perfect examples we have of a late Victorian town park in the borough. So, as I say, it's now over to the Officer Working Party that will take these ideas forward. There will be a detailed assessment or set of proposals worked up for each of the town centres. And we do want local organisations, in the case of Wimbledon, the Wimbledon Society and others, to get involved and to contribute to those, because in many cases they will be the repository of the historical information about those town centres, as well as being very involved in how they want them to develop. So I'll have a look at happy to have a look at these questions, Chair.
So Peter, thank you so much for that. So I've been looking at the questions for you, but thank you very much for your presentation, updating us. So I think one question you actually did answer towards the end, and I appreciate this is the Wimbledon Community Forum, which is why you focused on Wimbledon. But the question was, does your plan include other high streets and town centres, and in particular Merton High Street and Collier's Wood High Street were highlighted? But you did say towards the end of your presentation that yes, indeed it did. It did include other town centres as well.
James, yes, can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, yes.
Oh, that's good. Okay, I sort of switched off the vision inadvertently there. The 5 town centres are, in addition to Wimbledon, Morden, Mitcham, South Wimbledon as a specific area, Morden, Mitcham, South Wimbledon, and Rains Park, where I was talking last night.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And then a further question has been, and I'm not sure whether you said the Cabinet had rejected the report, but in terms of the reservations that the Cabinet had, did they set out what those reservations were, and also what officers or departments might be involved in moving this forward from here?
I hope I didn't say that. I just said
I didn't know. I don't think you said it had been rejected.
I did.
You
No,
did
no.
give the impression there had been maybe some reservations.
No, I think I just said as is the appropriate caveat every time that scrutiny can only make suggestions. It can't. It's up to the executive to take the actions. But I hope I was being there just overly cautious. The initial response from the Cabinet member was very positive, and I think, you know, big picture, everything is moving in very much the same direction at the moment on this. So we are about breathing new life into the high street. The whole of the broader Merton vision is likewise recognising the role of the high street along with our parks and open spaces. I don't see any contraindications, to be honest with you, James, as to why this shouldn't be accepted and embraced by the administration.
That's great, Peter. Thank you. And just continuing with comments from residents, presumably the officers and department that will take this forward will be decided in due course. But the specific question was have the Cabinet was it indicated to you as to whether financing would be made available for some of the recommendations in your report?
Certainly there's substantial financing going into the whole of the Merton 2030 vision. There are specific pots of finance for Morden in particular, about 300,000 there. And in the recent budget, sums of money were approved for Mitcham, for an incubator, for a town centre manager to revitalise the market. So there are pots of funding, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then a further question that was asked was, you mentioned the possibility of a town centre manager, and the question was asked, is that not something that already exists with Love Wimbledon in terms of providing that function within Wimbledon town centre?
Yes, it does, and the Love Wimbledon does perform that function. Again, I probably didn't explain that too well, but when I talked about Love Wimbledon performing a role that for the other high streets, we don't have a bid in place, so we would need a town centre manager in that role. But for and we indeed did have Sally Warren along from Love Wimbledon presenting the results of a survey they'd just undertaken about visitors' attitudes to Wimbledon High Street, Wimbledon Town Centre, and that was a valuable input as well.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any other questions or comments on Peter's report?
I'm willing to attempt to answer Sarah's long question in a little more detail. Yes?
Yeah, no, please go ahead, Peter. Yes. I mean, you have, it was something I raised with you, so I think you have addressed it, but if there's more to say, then please go ahead. But that was the one about reservations in the cabinet and financing and officers assigned to take this forward. So you have already answered, but if you want to go further, please do.
Well, no, I'm just thinking that we did, this is partly Nigel's question too, for South Wimbledon, we did draw a distinction, I think somewhere around the bend in the Broadway as to what was Wimbledon in one part and South Wimbledon in the other. And we have, you know, we got some very specific ideas from the walkabout that I did with Sarah and with Eve Cohen, which are fed back in. They are in the SWOT analysis in the appendix to the report, and I would expect officers to work in detail with those residents groups, Battle Residence Areas, Battle Area Residents Association, to come up with very specific findings and proposals for South Wimbledon.
Thank you, Peter. So no further questions or comments have come through. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you very much for your presentation this evening and for answering questions. Peter, I would like to say some members of the council, some people here this evening may be forced to retire in a few weeks' time, but two members this evening are going voluntarily. So Peter, just wanted to pay tribute to you briefly for your many years of service to Merton and to the residents of Merton, and in particular the difficult decisions sometimes by your group to assist in minority administration in being able to provide a stable governance to the borough, and that can't always have been easy, but for the greater good you've allowed that to happen, and you personally have led that to make sure that there is a stable administration in Merton. So thank you for your service, and also to David Williams, who as some of you will know is a former leader of the council, a former mayor of Merton, and is the current father of the council, in other words the longest serving member of the council. And I think both of you can point to things around the borough that are only here because of you. And I know David in particular in the leisure centre, in the sixth forms in Eastfield Station, and probably others that I can't remember, that those things are here because of your administration. But I just wanted to say to both Peter and David, thank you for your service, and others of us in this meeting may be joining you in retirement, but you are both retiring by choice and also following very distinguished service to the borough. So thank you both very much for that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, James, for a very fulsome trip. I can't let it go by, though, without saying that I did enjoy a very congenial and I hope constructive working relationship with David during that administration 2006 to 10. A bit of a baptism of fire for me. I was only a one-term councillor at that point. Learned a lot, but I think we always had a good relationship. And David would often put his group's point of view to me, and I would listen attentively. It worked very well. It was enjoyable, actually. So, David, thank you, and James too.
Well, that's kind of you to say that, Peter. It cuts both ways, and I think because we have got an election coming up. I think it's almost a bit of a reassurance to the public that, when you don't get a decisive result, and there wasn't a decisive result in either 2006 or 2010, the councillors who have been elected just have to get together and get on with it in the interest of the borough. And no doubt that's what would happen again.
Well, thank you both, and thank you for your comments. So the next, and Peter, thank you for presenting to us this evening. So the next item on the agenda is Olivia Mckay. I hope that's the right pronunciation, Mckay or Mckay, Mckay. Okay, great. Olivia, you're very welcome. You're from the Wimbledon Guild, and you're going to talk to us this evening on the subject of warm and well. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for having me. Hello. Yes, so I am the Winter Warmth Engagement Officer for Wimbledon Guild. So Chris invited me along here just to give a little bit of an overview on the project. So it's one of those things that we're really trying to spread the word, because there's so many people that this could benefit, but so few people know about it. So we started in January 2019, and we are funded by Merton Council, and we are in partnership with Thinking Works and Age UK Merton. So Thinking Works are really the energy efficiency side of what we do. So they can do home visits and assess the energy efficiency of individuals' homes, as well as giving specialist advice on lowering your bills. And then they will also do an assessment of the individual's personal circumstances, financial circumstances, to see what discounts you're eligible for that you are not accessing. So that could be the warm home discount, the water help discount, which, for example, in London boroughs, you have to be earning £20,111 or less, and outside of London boroughs, £16,480. So either of those, depending on where you live, you would be eligible. So there's that, and then we can also help you apply for those as well. There's something recently that we're finding that's become very popular is our fuel vouchers as well. So I'm getting a lot of referrals from individuals that are having to choose really between heating and eating. And if eligible, which I'll come on to afterwards, I would be able to liaise with that individual and refer them to my colleagues at Thinking Works, who will then issue them a £28 fuel voucher, which is then redeemed at the post office. So you do have to have prepayment meters for those, but we're finding those are becoming very, very common due to the increased price of fuel, which is affecting us all. So we managed to do those about 2 times a year per individual, sometimes 3, especially in the current climate. So there's that aspect to it, as well as advice on discounts. So that's really Thinking Works. And when they do their home visits, they will also give sort of a bag that really gets individuals starting. It's a little setup bag. So LED light bulbs, water saving shower heads, carbon monoxide monitors, radiator reflector panels, everything like that. So there's that aspect to it. And my role, as well as being a referrer for Thinking Works, is I do the handy person service as well. So I manage that on behalf of Wimbledon Guild, and I do referrals. So Chris, our handy person, is employed by Merton Council, and he's a free service. To be eligible, you have to be a Merton resident and either over 65 or have a long-term health condition. And he's a free service, and he can basically do anything that doesn't require a professional. So he can do putting up shelves, curtain poles, changing light bulbs, moving light bits of furniture. And he can also do some two-person jobs as well, because there is a partner in the Reable meeting that he works with. So referrals for those go straight through to me, and I will pop my email in the chat as well. And I will also email anybody information that requires it. And as I mentioned before, that I told you I was going to touch on, the eligibility criteria for Thinking Works is you have to be over 65 or have a long-term health condition or be on a low income, and you do have to be a Merton resident. So that's really the Warm and Well programme in a whole. And then my other aspect of my job is going out, doing a lot of outreach, community groups, CLCH, NXS, anything like that. So I'm really just trying to get the word out, and Chris has very kindly given me the platform tonight.
Olivia, thank you very much for that, and thank you for all you do for the people you support. Has anybody got any questions or comments for Olivia? Well, Olivia, I think you've covered everything, but thank you so much for giving us your briefing, and thank you again for all the work that you do, and for all the people that you help in the borough. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So next on our agenda, we have I've caught myself out by coming off my agenda. We have a Love Wimbledon update with Craig Herring, but Craig unfortunately is unable to attend. So Chris is going to, I think, read out a statement. Chris, is that right?
That's right, James. Yes, it's in the first person, so it will sound a little weird coming from me. I don't know what Craig sounds like, so I can't even do an impression. So I will do my best with what I've got. So apologies, I cannot be with you this evening. I would love to meet more of the local community tonight, but regrettably, I have an unavoidable childcare clash. I will do my utmost to attend the next meeting in June. I've been in post as the new Love Wimbledon Chief Executive for just over 2 months now, following Helen Clark-Bell's decision to step down after 10 years in the role. The bid begins its third term on the 1st of April 2022, and much of my immediate work has been focused on renewing our vendor and supplier contracts for the new 5-year bid term and setting budgets for our immediate work in 22-23. We're also experiencing some personnel changes, with 2 retirements this year following in the wake of Helen's departure, meaning the team will look different by the time we are back to full strength and I am more fully established in my role. I've been keen to meet as many stakeholders as possible since being in post, and have been introduced to a number of Love Wimbledon's important levy payers, key suppliers, councillors, Merton Council representatives, Stephen Hammond MP, and other bodies operating within the wider Wimbledon area. They have provided a warm welcome and together helped me to build a good understanding of the impact of COVID on Wimbledon Town Centre and where there are opportunities for us all as we plan for the recovery. This will be a major focus of the bid's work over the coming months as we consider how to take our pandemic learnings into building a vision for what Wimbledon Town Centre offers residents, domestic visitors, international tourists, current businesses, and future business, both in terms of our high street offering and evolving workplaces. We've also been busy bringing activations back into the town centre to coincide with the growth in footfall since restrictions were eased in early 2022. For Valentine's Day, we installed a hard insulation at the piazza, which had a real impact and was extremely well received, with partners, families, and pet owners sharing their love on our wooden heart. We also relaunched our monthly market programme at the start of March, with Rock Choir kicking things off in style. We'll be running a range of different market events throughout the year, including ones focusing on sustainability and Friday markets for more of a mixed residential and business audience. It's been a busy time for Love Wimbledon too in terms of our work supporting keeping the town clean. COVID has had a real impact on waste collection in the early part of 2022, and we're working with Merton Council, Veolia, First Mile and other waste contractors currently to deliver over 200 additional outcomes a month in terms of removing fly tipping, fly posting and additional waste collection for our businesses. Our monthly community clean programs have resulted in 80 interventions already this year to remove a spate of graffiti tagging and provide additional jet washing to clean up some key areas. We'll also be arranging a deep clean of Hartfield Walk next month, ahead of some snagging work which we wanted to do once the area had been through the winter period while celebrating its first anniversary. Moving forward, we have a busy programme of events planned that I'll be able to discuss in more depth at the next community forum in June. This includes a number of installations across the town centre to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, including a design competition for local children and the return of some of Love Wimbledon's larger town centre activities, including big screen tennis for the Wimbledon Fortnight. From a green and sustainable perspective, we'll be launching a cargo bike pilot programme for our businesses soon, with the support of Cross River Partnership and Merton Council, and we'll be testing this with a range of different scenarios to establish how useful it will be to our businesses. Once again, I'm sorry I couldn't join you tonight, but I'm looking forward to working with you over the coming months. Please do get in touch if you'd like to meet. I'm really keen to see as many people as possible over the coming months. Best wishes, Craig.
So, Chris, thank you so much for that. So, two comments from me. The first is to highlight what Craig has said, that he's encouraging residents to get in touch with him. So please do so with your comments and your ideas, and obviously look forward to Craig attending this meeting in June, and hopefully then he'll be able to do the presentation that he's been unable to do this evening. I'd also like to, on behalf of all of you. So that's a very good question. Chris, do we have an email address or contact details?
We do. I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I would also just like to pay tribute to Helen Clark-Bell, and hopefully on behalf of all of you, Helen has been a very regular attender at these meetings and is a massive champion for Wimbledon Town Centre. So perhaps we can just, Chris, put on record our thanks to her and for her service as well to the borough and to Wimbledon in particular. So the rest of that item will have to defer until the June meeting. So the next item is Chris, you're going to give us an update on the consultation or work being done on the future of the community forums, the community forum review. We have, just to remind everybody, we have had a discussion at a previous forum as to how disappointing it is that COVID has hit these forums so badly, and certainly the Wimbledon forum so badly, and we have seen numbers really decline very substantially. So Chris, that's the background that we've discussed at this forum before, and now over to you to talk about the review.
Thanks, James. So it's been a decade since we last made any significant changes to the forum. We had a full-time officer who looked after the forums across the board, but that post was made redundant in 2011, I think. And clearly, the last couple of years, we've had a lot of changes with switching to remote meetings and learning to use the technology. And that was a very steep learning curve for all of us, particularly me trying to drive the desk from home. It's a very strange experience, but we've got that. Hopefully, I've got the hang of it now. And then last year, when we did your Merton engagement exercise, which again was unusual to do in the pandemic, and we had to change how we do quite a lot of things and do things a bit more digitally. We did get a lot of feedback from residents about wanting to be more involved in some of those key decisions around town centres in particular, and green spaces, some of the issues that Peter was talking about in his presentation. So we need to make sure that we've got the mechanisms in place to facilitate that really, and support those who want to get involved and want to contribute. So in this part of the review, what we want to do is get some feedback, first of all, on what you think works currently, what works well, what doesn't work as well, what could be improved. We've also looked at different approaches across other boroughs and different models for how these sorts of meetings might work, or different approaches to it. And we want some feedback on those ideas and whether they might be improvement, whether there's elements we can borrow from them. We are open to all suggestions on what might work, what might benefit things. And there's no reason why it has to be the same approach in every part of the borough. We're open to doing, different ways of doing things in different areas, or what's right for that community. So what I did initially was look at across all the London boroughs at the different approaches. There are broadly 8 different models, including those that are quite similar to what we already do. So I'm going to run through some of those other models now, I know we've previously spoken about and got some feedback on current state of the forums. I'm happy to have that conversation again from those who didn't participate last time, but also would be interesting to get any views on some of these other alternative approaches and what people might like about them, and also what wouldn't work locally. So some boroughs run what's called an area committee. This is a formal structure committee of the council. So it's populated by councillors, and often then with co-opted groups, resident associations or other groups attached to those meetings. There's usually opportunity for the public to speak, but it's very much a decision-making body, often with funding to spend on the local area. That might be through SIL or through other council budgets. So for example, our neighbours in Sutton have this approach. They have committees that cross 2 or 3 of their wards. The councillors sit on those committees and they make decisions about a relatively small funding pot, which can contribute to parks or street scene or open spaces in those areas. Other boroughs have gone down the road of contracting another organisation to run their local engagement. That gives the benefit of it being independent, but equally means it's not connected to the council. Some of those commission groups can be existing residents associations, so they're working in partnership with groups that are already well established, or they can be a single expert in delivering engagement tools. They can also be a mix of public meetings and online discussion forums. So, for example, Lambeth have set up something fairly recently. They've got an online discussion board for each of their wards, and they've appointed either a residents group or another agency to run those boards for each of those wards. With the growth of digital approaches, we've seen a growth in these 2 different ways of doing things. Digital panels are a representative group of residents who completes regular online surveys. So they are usually invited. They're generally designed to be a representative sample, and they give regular feedback to the council and other partners on local issues and involved in local consultations. So the downside of that is that those aren't open to everybody. They'll be by invitation only, so it does exclude others who'd like to get involved. That's something that goes on in Kensington and Chelsea, amongst other boroughs. Discussion boards are online again, but they're open and anyone can get involved. Obviously, there's a moderation issue. You need to make sure everyone's being nice and behaving. But it generates a depth of input from residents. Not in the same format as a survey, so you don't end up with percentage X saying Y, but you end up with a much richer data source to work with. That's something that Barking and Dagenham are running at the moment. Quite popular across bits of London are question time style events. Usually it's a leader or a directly elected mayor and the cabinet or other local officials. It can be the borough commander or someone from the fire brigade or others who attend and are quizzed by members of the public. They can either be on a big geography, so the Mayor of London does this with all the Assembly members, so Leonie will attend these. They move around London, often chaired by someone from LBC or a local journalist, and people can quiz the Mayor and the other Assembly members, or they can be much more locally focused. So in Wandsworth, they hold these question time events in each ward. They move them around the wards. So over a 4-year cycle, every ward will get a question time event. So that obviously means you've got direct contact with those elected officials. It will be much less presentational than perhaps these event meetings are, but you're able to quiz those who are making decisions. Citizen assemblies have become quite a big tool over the last few years. This is where you get a randomly selected group of residents, bring them in, present them with evidence and information, get them to discuss a particular issue and recommend a set of solutions that then become policy. These have been very popular, particularly around climate change and big chewy issues like that, where there are big significant factors to look at. But it could also be around things like regeneration programs. Newham has been running some of these, particularly around some of the neighbourhood regeneration work. they're quite resource intensive, and again, they're not open. It's a selected group, but you can see a clear chain between what people have said and then what the organisation's doing in response. Another approach that's been adopted in a few places, but Ealing have got it going at the moment, is where you decentralise this model and ask individual wards to decide what's best in their local area. So they will have support from a central team, but they'll organise and host local meetings in their area, and then be able to feed back into the organisation. So it makes it much more flexible, but equally less consistent, because each ward will do something a bit different. So we've got a survey up and running, which you can find by going to our consultation hub, and that's running until the 4th of April. Please fill it in. I made it clear at Rains Park last night that currently we've had more responses from Wimbledon than other parts of the borough, to try and get their competitive juices going. So if you don't want Rains Park to overtake Wimbledon, then please get involved and make sure you give us some feedback. There's a section on the forums during the pandemic and the use of the remote stuff, on forums more generally, and then a final section on these other approaches and what we can learn from those. So any feedback will be great and gratefully received. I'm happy to take any questions or comments now, of course, and any discussion that we want to have.
So Chris, thank you so much for that. And I really would commend to everybody, including elected members, but most particularly residents, please do contribute. Please do go to that website that Chris has identified. And Chris, can I ask you to put it into the chat as well? But please do go to that website and contribute. It is really disappointing. I said earlier this evening that I've done this for 8 years, and it may well be that my time chairing this forum is coming to an end. Time will tell, but it is a real shame to see numbers drop off so dramatically during the pandemic, and there is an opportunity to turn it around and to find ways of revitalizing this forum in a slightly different way. I thought some of those ideas from other boroughs were innovative and exciting, and so please do contribute, and please ask your neighbours and friends and family to contribute too, because at the end of the day, as I have said in the past, but perhaps I've said it less recently, what I love about the forum is it really is the opportunity for residents to participate in your own government, to contribute ideas and to contribute thoughts and policy ideas, to raise concerns and to hold elected representatives to account. And I think it is such a shame that numbers have gone down so far during the pandemic, and I really hope that this consultation is a way to allow people to re-engage and be part of their own government and decision making locally. So Chris, thanks so much for that. I think rather than, if it's okay with everybody, rather than have a debate on 8 different options, unless somebody has a burning desire to say something, I was going to suggest we move on to the final item, which is the soapbox item, where residents can raise any issue they want, and councillors are obviously here to listen and to respond. It may be that residents want to, as part of that, raise an issue on what Chris has just said, but whether it's on that or something else, can I ask if there are any comments or questions to put them in the chat? And this is the final item of this evening. We've had a packed meeting and a good meeting, but are there any questions or comments that residents want to make? And if there are, please do put them in the chat.
James, at a previous meeting, we were asked about the Trust Ford trees, and I have an update on that, if that would be helpful to.
Oh yes, please, Chris.
Share.
Thank you.
For those who remember, Trust Ford removed 11 trees without permission when they weren't supposed to do so. The position at the moment is the council has insisted that those trees have been replaced there are now 11 semi-mature London plane trees that have been replaced at exactly the same spot. And an additional 12 new silver birch trees have been planted along the River Wandle as well. Further to that, the council's also put 26 tree preservation orders on trees on the site. So as a result, that the council's considered that the matter is now settled and there'll be no further enforcement action taken.
Thank you, Chris. While you were talking, a comment has come through to suggest that a hybrid model may work, whereby we return the forums return to being in person, but with a way to link in by Zoom. Any other questions or comments on any matter to do with any local issues? And certainly, sorry, just picking up on the comments as they come through, both from Michael. Yeah, I mean, more wider advertising is definitely needed, and that's something that's been touched on before. Okay, final call for any resident questions or comments. Okay, well, as residents will have seen this evening, those of you who are here and listening in. Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to stop for Reg's question. And I don't know, I suspect still Wimbledon, and I don't know, Chris, whether you know, but those residents who are moving into the new Wandle ward, they will still be part of the Wimbledon Forum as it's currently constituted anyway. Is that right?
When the forums moved to the town centre-based approach in the distant past, Peter will remember this, the idea was to not specify which ward belonged to which, because a lot of wards are quite close to more than one town centre. So to some extent, you can vote with your feet. If you think Wimbledon is the more relevant town centre to you, your house won't have moved, even if your ward has changed slightly. So I would still continue to go to the one you were going to before. But there's been an issue in places like Dundonald for some years, because if you're at one end of Dundonald, you're 50 feet away from Wimbledon town centre, and if you're at the other end, you're only about 100 yards from Whitrange Park. So people in that ward will go to either both or either. So if your ward has changed from May, I would suggest, and unless you've moved house, you're still going to the same forum if that's the one that's most relevant to you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So Sarah's asked a question. I can see I've just totted it up. I think there are 7 councillors here, including Councillor Anthony Fairclough, who I haven't introduced yet, as he joined a little after I did the introductions. But Anthony, thank you for being here. So there are 7 councillors here, and here is a test for all of us. There's Sarah's question: why are tree pits not tree pits anymore? And then there's a comment about Conway. Conway gets instructions with drawings on how to tarmac, and often around tree trunks or pits are shrunk. Who gives these instructions, and how can we stop this? So is there any councillor, or Peter? I thought you were putting up your hand then. I thought you were going to jump in. Peter Walker, I thought, was going to jump in and save us with a perfect answer, but sadly not. Are there any councillors who feel they're able to answer this question? Oh dear.
I have a feeling, James, I've got an email somewhere where they explain.
Go on then. You step forward, Anthony. Save us all. Go on.
I was going to say I don't have the email to hand, but I do think I have an email where the officer in question explains this, which I'm more than willing to dig out and forward to anybody who's interested. I'll put my email address in the chat, and then if anybody's interested, they can email me, and I'll dig it out tomorrow and send it on to them.
Thank you, Anthony. If you could also forward that to Chris, and then he can put the contents, perhaps not the whole email, but he can put the relevant points on the site as well. David, were you going to jump in? Is that why you've turned? No. Okay, Anthony, thank you for saving the rest of us with that answer. Any other final call for any other questions or comments from residents? Sorry, so Sarah again, public realm designs are off. Oh, I'm losing it now because others are coming through. So apologies, just 1 second. public realm designs are often not very functional outside the station. For example, how can community locals get involved in these decisions that affect us all? Well, one way is the revitalised community forum, and this is a really good place and good opportunity to raise these very points and to talk about what buildings look like, what you want buildings to look like, etc. And so I would urge all residents to use this forum as a way of doing that, lobbying your councillors, writing to your councillors. Under the Localism Act of just over 10 years ago, there are a number of different ways that residents can get involved in decisions that are made locally, including around planning, including around neighbourhood plans, which has been tried on more than one occasion in Merton. So there are lots of things, lots of ways that residents can get involved, and as I said, not least this forum. The station forecourt is owned by, unless somebody tells me I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. The station forecourt is actually owned by the rail company. So unfortunately their consultation may have been deficient. So Sarah, you're really keeping me on my toes right in the last few minutes of the meeting, but your points are well made, and hopefully I've outlined different ways in which residents can get involved in all these things, and they are important. And Sarah, I wish there'd been more of this in the last few years of the questions you've given throughout the evening to hold people to account. And so thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution, making up for being ill. Well, we're very happy that you're here with us this evening. And Anthony, please do share that email with Chris, and he can take the key points and relay them to everybody. So thank you all very much. We've had a very packed meeting this evening. It does have a slight end of term feel, so apologies for residents that for us as councillors it has a slight end of term feel. But I thank you all very much for coming, and I just want to finish by urging you again, please contribute to the please do contribute to the consultation that is ongoing. Please do continue to come to these meetings and getting involved. And as I've said already, I'm a real believer in all residents being involved in your local government. So please, those of you who are regulars, please keep coming. Those of you who are able to, please encourage others to come as well. I have two elections to get through before I'm back here, so I'm not going to predict whether I do or not. I have to be re-elected by residents and then by the council to this role. So I'm going to say to you all, it may be my last evening chairing after 8 years, maybe not. Time will tell. But thank you all for attending, councillors and residents. And I wish you all a good rest of your evening, and thank you very much, and thank you, Chris, as always, and good night, everybody.